Okay. So this deep dive,
Oh,
right? So, this one is going to take us into some pretty dark territory.
yeah. It's going to be intense.
Yeah, we're looking into a Polish religious group. It's called IWoT, Misja Czaitanii.
Right. And they also go by the name Science of Identity Foundation here in the U.S.
Right, right. SFS.
And we've got this document. It was actually just compiled this month, and it outlines some,
Yeah, December 2024.
yeah, some really serious allegations against the group itself, against its leader, Chris Butler,
Oh,
and
yeah.
a lot of their practices. And well, I mean, it's not just like the number of claims or anything, but it's really the kind of the patterns that they revealed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This document is suggesting there's this whole system of control and exploitation.
Yeah.
And it's not just like one area. It seems like it touches on everything
Oh, yeah.
from spiritual beliefs to
Yeah.
finances, relationships, you name it.
Right, right. Yeah. It's kind of like, it really makes you wonder how people end up in situations like this, like seemingly normal people. That's always the question, isn't it?
Right, right. So what are some of the things that kind of jumped out at you initially in this document as like red flags?
Well, right off the bat, the document talks about IWoT using, they call, quote unquote, mafia-like rules.
Oh.
And, it claims there's a ban on business competition.
Yeah.
So followers can't
Wow.
have a business that competes with the guru Chris Butler.
Wow.
And there's even this requirement to pay, they call it a tribute, if you want to run a business that's similar to something he's involved in or one of the higher-ups is involved in.
So like if you're a successful entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
like in this group, you might actually have to pay.
Right, like for permission,
Right.
essentially, to operate.
Wow.
Which is pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
And that's all on top of this expectation that followers are going to dedicate a ton of their time and resources to the group.
Oh, yeah.
And often that comes at the expense of their own personal lives,
Right.
their families, their careers, all that kind of stuff.
It seems like this control goes way beyond just finances, though.
Oh, absolutely.
The document also describes IWoT using all these manipulative tactics, during recruitment.
Right, right.
Like love bombing and NLP, persuasion, gaslighting, baiting, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of jargon in there, too.
Yeah, yeah. Can you break down a few of those for our listener? Like, for example, what exactly is love bombing? Is that what it sounds like?
It kind of is, yeah. Love bombing is essentially, it's like showering potential recruits with just this overwhelming amount of attention and affection and praise, and it just creates this really intense feeling of belonging,
Right.
which can be so alluring, especially for people who are maybe feeling isolated or vulnerable in some way.
Right. Right.
So it makes sense that it would be a powerful recruiting tool.
So it sounds actually insidious in a way. Is that why it's considered like a manipulative tactic?
Well, you have to think about it like this. It bypasses rational thought. Right? It appeals directly to that deep human need we all have
Sure.
for connection and acceptance.
Right. Yeah.
And while, genuine warmth and support, those are wonderful things, right?
Yep.
In this context, that affection, it often comes with these kind of strings attached, right?
Mm.
So once you're emotionally invested, you're much more likely to overlook any red flags, and kind of just conform to the group's demands, even if they start to feel, I don't know, unreasonable or whatever.
Right. And NLP is mentioned in this document as well.
Right, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that exactly? And how might that be used in kind of like a manipulative context?
Well, so NLP, it's really just a collection of techniques
Okay.
that are aimed at influencing communication and behavior.
Oh.
Now, in its more ethical applications, NLP can be used for things like personal development, therapy,
Sure.
but in the wrong hands, like these techniques can be twisted to
Right.
subtly manipulate people's thoughts, their beliefs, their actions.
Right. So if we take these like intense recruitment tactics like love bombing and NLP, and we combine them with this
Yeah.
mafia-like system of financial and social control that we're talking about,
Right. Right.
it paints a pretty disturbing picture.
It does. It definitely raises some serious concerns. And then the document goes on to claim that there's this hidden caste system within IWoT, that further limits people's opportunities
Oh.
for spiritual advancement or leadership positions.
Mhm.
And it creates this kind of internal rat race,
Right, right.
where followers are constantly striving for approval and status within the group.
Can you unpack that a little bit more for our listener? Like, what does a caste system even look like in like a modern religious context?
Right. Well, traditionally a caste system is this rigid social hierarchy.
Yeah.
You're born into a particular class, and there's very little chance of you moving up, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But the documents alleging that IWoT has created a similar system, but instead of it being based on your birth, it's tied to this idea of your perceived spiritual purity or your favor within the group.
So not all members are treated equally.
That's what it seems like.
Okay.
And this caste system, it determines everything, like who you can socialize with, what knowledge you're allowed to access, even which rituals you can participate in.
Wow.
It's claimed that even like fundamental practices like initiation into Harinama and Diksha, which are very central to the Gaudiya tradition, right?
Right.
They claim to follow that. But even those are made incredibly difficult to attain within the group.
See, that seems counterintuitive to me. You'd think an organization that's truly spiritual,
Right.
they would want to encourage their members to progress and deepen their understanding.
Yeah, you'd think they'd want to make it easier, not harder.
Right.
It does make you wonder about the motivations behind all these restrictions.
Right. Is it truly about spiritual growth, or is it about maintaining control?
Right. And ensuring continued dependence
Right.
on the group, the leader.
Yeah. Especially when you consider this document claims that any kind of criticism, any evaluation of IWoT's actions
Right.
is totally forbidden.
Right.
Why would a religious group, a legitimate one, be so afraid of scrutiny?
Well, I mean, think about it. Openness to feedback, constructive dialogue, those are essential
Sure.
in any healthy community,
Right.
especially one focused on spiritual exploration.
Right.
So this aversion to criticism, it's often a sign that control and conformity are being prioritized over genuine inquiry.
Yeah. And it's not just criticism of the group that's forbidden, right?
Right.
We're seeing claims that they even restrict discussions about the guru, Chris Butler, amongst their members, and they forbid them from even reading advanced Vedic scriptures.
Right.
They really seem to be controlling information very tightly.
They are, yeah. By limiting what followers can read, who they can talk to, what topics they can discuss,
Right.
they control the narrative.
Yeah. And they maintain this tight grip on how those teachings are interpreted.
It's like an echo chamber almost, right?
It is, yeah. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And without that access to alternative viewpoints,
Right.
or even the ability to just, question the teachings, it's got to be very difficult for individuals to form their own understanding.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even just to recognize inconsistencies or potential red flags.
Right, yeah.
It's hard when you don't have all of the information.
And this control also seems to go beyond, the spiritual realm.
Oh, yeah.
Right. This document is alleging that IWoT exerts a lot of control over its members' personal lives as well.
That's right. There are claims that they dictate everything from who followers can be friends with, what jobs they can have,
Okay.
even influencing romantic relationships and family ties.
So that's incredibly intrusive,
It is, yeah. And it really impacts their ability to think critically or make their own choices. Right. Because their whole social world, their support system, their sense of self-worth, it's all tied up in the group.
It is, yeah. It becomes very difficult to break free.
Right. Even if they start having doubts.
Right, because leaving the group could mean losing everything, you
Yeah.
know? It's
Yeah.
a scary prospect for anyone. It's almost like a form of captivity.
Okay.
Not physical captivity, but emotional and social.
So what would you say are some of the parallels between that kind of emotional and social control and like more traditional forms of captivity?
Well, I mean, in both cases, the individual's freedom is restricted, right?
Yeah.
Their choices are limited, and they're often subjected to these systems of rewards and punishments that are designed to just reinforce compliance.
Right.
So they may experience fear, isolation, a loss of autonomy. It makes it so hard to assert their independence
Right.
and even harder to escape the situation.
Yeah. So this whole idea of control, this level of control, sounds so incredibly isolating. Is that why this document really emphasizes the fact that leaving IWoT can result in ostracism and even bans against anyone that speaks out against the group?
Yeah, it's a very common tactic. You know, they want to maintain control.
Sure.
They want to silence dissent.
Right.
So they threaten to cut people off from their entire community,
Wow.
their friends, their support network. It's a very powerful deterrent
Yeah.
against leaving or speaking out, even if you have legitimate concerns or have been harmed.
This all sounds so manipulative and exploitative.
It really does.
But it's not just, this document doesn't just focus on control, right?
Right.
It also alleges that IWoT deviates really significantly from traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Right, right, which is really interesting from a theological standpoint.
Good.
To understand the deviations, we have to have just a little bit of background on what Gaudiya Vaishnavism actually is.
Okay.
So it's a branch of Hinduism.
Okay.
And it emphasizes a personal relationship with the divine.
Okay.
Specifically with Krishna, and it's a path that's all about love and devotion.
Okay, so where does IWoT diverge from these core principles then?
Well, the document lists numerous examples.
Okay.
One is that they incorporate elements of impersonal yoga systems, which are systems that focus on merging with this abstract impersonal force.
All right.
So it's a major departure from the personal relationship with Krishna that's emphasized in traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
So like instead of a loving connection with a personal God, it becomes more about dissolving into some sort of cosmic energy.
Yeah, essentially. And that shift has implications for how followers understand their own spiritual journey and the ultimate goal of their practice.
Are there any other examples of IWoT practices kind of contradicting those traditional Gaudiya beliefs?
There are quite a few. One of the most striking is that they use distorted mantras.
Okay.
Mantras are sacred sounds or phrases. You know, you chant them to connect with the divine and cultivate specific spiritual qualities. So the document alleges that IWoT uses altered versions.
So we're seeing claims.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Right, yeah.
That they're using altered versions of these traditional Gaudiya mantras.
Okay.
And this is significant because in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the specific sounds and the vibrations of the mantras, they're believed to have spiritual power.
Right.
So by altering them, you could be seen as manipulating the spiritual experience of followers and kind of directing their energy toward a different goal.
So it's not just about changing the words, it's about changing the whole meaning and purpose.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of these sacred practices.
Right. It raises concerns about the authenticity of their teachings, the potential for manipulation.
Right.
And these concerns aren't limited to their spiritual practices, right?
Okay.
We also see in the document claims about some of the financial practices within IWoT.
Right. Particularly when it comes to the wealth of Chris Butler, compared to the financial struggles of a lot of his followers.
Yeah. It's been alleged that he is a multimillionaire.
Wow.
While a lot of his followers are living in poverty.
Right, even though they're regularly donating?
Exactly, despite regularly donating a significant portion of their income to the group.
Right. That's a pretty stark contrast.
It is. The document claims that while Butler's enjoying this lavish lifestyle, many of his followers are really struggling to make ends meet. They're experiencing hunger, hardship.
Right, right.
You know, and this is all despite them being encouraged to put the group's needs above their own.
Right, yeah.
All the time.
There's even mention of a family in Poland who lost a child to malnutrition.
Yeah.
And the father was a devoted follower of IWoT.
Yes, and the document suggests that Butler and the group leadership, you know, they showed very little compassion or financial support in that situation.
That's incredibly disturbing.
It is.
It makes you wonder how people can continue to follow a leader who seems so indifferent to their suffering.
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
It really speaks to some of the powerful psychological mechanisms that are at play within groups like this.
Right.
You know, I mean, the document suggests that IWoT utilizes various tactics to maintain this level of devotion, you know, things like the love bombing, information control that we talked about earlier. Right. And they place a heavy emphasis on hierarchy, obedience, submission to the guru.
And speaking of hierarchy, you know, we keep coming back to this theme of control.
Right.
What are some of the additional ways that this document alleges that IWoT is exerting control over its members' lives?
Well, one of the most concerning claims is that Chris Butler and his inner circle operate with this complete lack of accountability.
Okay.
Like, there are allegations that there's no independent system of checks and balances within IWoT.
Right, right.
Butler makes all the decisions, and there's no avenue for appeal or redress if a member feels like they've been wronged.
And it's even been suggested that IWoT has protected people within the group that have been accused of criminal activity.
That's right. The document alleges that IWoT has shielded members that have been involved in drug trafficking, pyramid schemes, even sexual assault.
That's chilling.
It is, yeah. It creates this sense of impunity. where those in power can seemingly act without consequence.
Right.
And it just reinforces this idea that Butler is above the law and that questioning him or his decisions is not only discouraged, but potentially dangerous.
So this is all starting to paint a very disturbing picture of this group.
It is.
But as we've said, we need to remember that this is just one side of the story.
Right. We haven't heard from IWoT or Chris Butler directly yet.
Right, yeah.
It's really important to maintain a critical perspective and consider all sides.
Right.
But, you know, even with that caveat, the sheer number and the seriousness of these allegations, it's concerning.
So where do we go from here with this deep dive then?
Well, the document goes on to provide even more specific examples of IWoT's practices and the impact they've had on people's lives. I think exploring those is going to be crucial to really understanding the scope of what's being alleged here.
Okay, so stay tuned.
Yeah.
In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to continue unpacking this document's claims about IWoT, Misja Czaitanii.
Welcome back to our deep dive into IWoT. One of the things that's really striking is how, these allegations paint this picture of an organization that seems to really prioritize control over genuine spiritual exploration.
Yeah, it raises a lot of questions about, their motives.
It does.
Especially when you consider that the document claims that IWoT, Misja Czaitanii, is actively discouraging its followers from seeking medical or mental health treatment.
Yeah.
Suggesting that, prayer and faith are all they need.
That's a very concerning allegation. Denying people access to health care can have really devastating consequences, both physically and psychologically. If someone's dealing with a mental health issue, telling them that prayer is the only solution, that can prevent them from getting the professional help they need.
So, are we talking about a form of indoctrination here? Where followers are systematically taught to distrust outside sources?
Potentially, yeah. It's certainly a possibility.
Right.
And this kind of isolation, this dependence, can make people so vulnerable to manipulation, to exploitation.
Right. The document also describes IWoT using ostracism as a tool to control people.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit for our listener?
Yeah. So ostracism in this context, it means being totally shut out from the community.
Okay.
So if you question the group's teachings, if you decide to leave,
right,
you're basically cut off from everyone you know, everything you've built your life around.
So it's like a social exile almost.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly traumatic, especially for people that have dedicated years of their lives to this group.
Right.
You know, it's a very effective way to silence dissent and maintain control.
It's interesting because the document also claims that IWoT is encouraging its followers to attack other Gaudiya groups.
Yeah.
Which almost seems contradictory.
Right.
To promote isolation from the outside world.
It does seem contradictory.
But then to be engaging in conflict with other organizations.
Right. But it actually, it reinforces this us versus them mentality that's so common in groups like this.
Right.
So by creating an external enemy, it strengthens those internal bonds within the community.
Right.
And it makes members even more reliant on the group for safety and validation.
Yeah. And the document's pointing out that this hostility is directed not just toward other Gaudiya groups, but toward anyone who questions or criticizes IWoT. They even mention IWoT suing people who speak out against them.
Yeah, legal action is a very effective way to intimidate critics and discourage others from coming forward.
Right.
It creates this climate of fear where people are afraid to share their experiences.
Right, even if they've been harmed.
Exactly.
Which feeds back into this whole idea of control that we keep discussing.
It does,
right? What other tactics are described in this document?
Well, one that is particularly disturbing is that IWoT has been known to actually shield members that have been accused of criminal activity.
Right. We're talking about some serious allegations here.
You're very serious, yeah. Drug trafficking, pyramid schemes, sexual assault.
It's pretty shocking that an organization that claims to be, spiritual, ethical, would be protecting individuals that are accused of these kinds of acts.
It does make you question their priorities, whether they're really concerned about the well-being of their members.
It seems like it all kind of ties back to Chris Butler.
It does, yeah.
The leader of IWoT.
Right.
The document paints a very unflattering picture of him, alleging that, he's a multimillionaire, lives this lavish lifestyle.
Right, lives in opulence.
While while many of his followers are struggling financially.
Yes. Yeah. Struggling to survive, really,
Right.
And this is despite, like we said, them donating regularly a huge portion of their income.
Right. There was even mention of a family in Poland
Right.
who lost a child to malnutrition.
Yes. A very tragic story.
Yeah.
And the document claims that Butler and the group's leadership showed very little compassion or financial support.
It's really heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
The level of devotion and trust that these individuals place in a leader who seems so indifferent.
It is, and it speaks to the immense power and influence that he has over his followers.
Yeah. The document also claims that Butler's created a caste system within IWoT.
Yeah. A caste system, for those who don't know, is this rigid social hierarchy where people are born into a particular class with very limited opportunities to move up.
Sure.
It's usually associated with ancient cultures.
Right.
But the document claims that IWoT has created a similar system within their organization.
So not all members are treated equally.
That's the allegation. This supposed caste system dictates everything from who you can associate with to what level of spiritual knowledge you can access.
So it creates a system where followers are, they're constantly striving to prove their worth.
Yes.
And ascend this hierarchy, often at the expense of their personal lives and their well-being.
Right. You're always trying to outperform your fellow members.
Right.
To gain favor with the guru.
It's almost like a spiritual competition.
Yeah. And it creates a very toxic environment.
Right.
Fosters resentment, jealousy, even exploitation.
Right. Speaking of exploitation, we touched on IWoT's alleged financial practices earlier.
Right.
But the document also suggests that there's a pattern of labor exploitation within the group as well.
Yeah, there are accounts of members working extremely long hours without pay.
Right.
Often, neglecting their own needs.
We're seeing claims that people were pressured to abandon their careers, their educations, their personal goals.
That's right.
All to serve IWoT.
All in the name of serving IWoT.
Right.
And this level of self-sacrifice.
Right.
It's often framed as a spiritual virtue.
Sure.
As a way to demonstrate your devotion.
Okay.
And earn favor.
Which is a really powerful form of manipulation.
It is, yeah.
Convincing people that self-sacrifice is somehow the path to enlightenment.
Right. And it can have really devastating consequences for those who buy into that.
Right. There's even mention in the document of IWoT discouraging its followers from seeking medical or mental health treatment.
Right.
Suggesting that, prayer and faith are sufficient.
Right. Which is a very concerning claim, as we said before. Denying people access to health care, especially when it comes to mental health, can have really serious and lasting consequences.
Yeah, it paints a pretty bleak picture.
It does.
But despite how disturbing these accounts are, the document does offer a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
It highlights, the resilience of those who have left IWoT, their courage in speaking out, and their determination to rebuild their lives.
Right. It's important to remember that people can and do break free from these types of situations.
Yeah.
And there are resources out there to help them heal and reclaim their lives.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some of the most crucial takeaways for our listener, would you say?
Well, this exploration has really highlighted the importance of critical thinking, especially when you're encountering, groups or individuals that claim to have all the answers.
Sure.
Or that demand absolute obedience.
Yeah, it's a reminder that abuse and exploitation can really happen anywhere.
It can, yeah.
Even within organizations that present themselves as spiritual or benevolent.
And, if someone starts exhibiting some of the behaviors we've been talking about, approach the situation with empathy and concern. Try to understand what might be drawing them to this group.
Yeah.
And remember that there are resources available to help.
This deep dive has been, it's been a sobering look.
It has, yeah.
But, I think a necessary one.
I agree.
Into the kind of the dark side of spiritual seeking.
Yeah. It's important to remember that true spirituality should empower you. It shouldn't control you.
Right. Good reminder.
So, keep asking questions, stay informed, and trust your instincts.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to our deep dive into IWoT, Misja Czaitanii.
Yeah.
We've spent the last two segments really kind of unpacking some unsettling allegations
we have
against this group and its leader, Chris Butler.
Right.
But as we've said, it's vital to remember there are multiple sides to every story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And while we haven't heard, directly from IWoT,
Right.
this document does include some firsthand accounts
Yes.
from former members. And I think these personal stories are really crucial to understanding
Yeah.
the human cost of the practices we've been talking about.
So we're kind of moving from the theoretical to the deeply personal now.
Exactly. Yeah, and one of the things that that's really striking is the sheer difficulty of leaving IWoT.
Right.
So many former members describe feeling trapped, isolated,
Right.
afraid to speak out.
Well, we've talked about, the threat of ostracism, bans.
Right.
For those that leave or criticize the group, but I mean, to hear it from the perspective of those who have actually lived it
Yeah.
really drives home the impact, I think.
It does. Imagine dedicating years of your life
Right.
to a community, your whole social world, and
Well,
then you're suddenly cut off from
Yeah.
everyone and everything you know.
Yeah, it's like losing your whole support system overnight.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's on top of the emotional and psychological toll of
Right.
questioning everything you believe in,
Yeah.
grappling with feelings of betrayal, disillusionment, maybe even shame.
Yeah. The document includes some really heartbreaking stories
It does.
about,
Yeah.
the impact this has had on families.
Mm-hmm.
There are accounts of, parents being separated from their children, siblings turning against each other.
Yeah, the document suggests that IWoT demands this absolute loyalty,
Wow.
often at the expense of family ties.
Right.
Followers are pressured to put the group above all else, even their loved ones.
There's one story that's particularly poignant about a woman whose son joined IWoT.
Yeah,
And she describes feeling like she lost her son to this group.
right.
Like he just became a stranger.
Yeah, that sense of alienation is a common theme in a lot of these accounts.
Right.
Former members talk about how the teachings, the practices, it gradually changes their loved ones, making them withdrawn, secretive, even hostile.
It's like the group becomes a wedge almost.
Yeah, it is.
Driven between these family members, creating these rifts that are often irreparable.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. This document, it's not just a collection of allegations or anything. It's really a window into some very real pain and
Yes.
suffering that these practices have caused.
Right. And it's important to remember these are just a few of the stories that have been shared.
Right.
There are probably many others who have been
Right.
harmed, but are still afraid to come forward.
And the document highlights the impact that this alleged exploitation has had
Right.
on followers' lives, beyond just their personal relationships.
Yeah.
There are accounts of people who are pressured to abandon their careers,
Right.
their educations, their dreams.
Yeah, we're seeing claims that members were expected to work long hours
Right.
for no pay,
Right.
often neglecting their own needs, their own aspirations
Right. To serve the group.
to serve the group.
Yeah.
And it was often framed as this spiritual virtue.
Right. Like a way to demonstrate their devotion
Exactly.
and earn favor within IWoT.
Which is, again, it's just this powerful form of manipulation.
Right. Convincing people that self-sacrifice is the path to enlightenment.
Right. Yeah.
There's even mention of IWoT discouraging followers from seeking medical or mental health treatment,
Yeah.
suggesting that prayer and faith alone are sufficient.
Which is a very concerning claim, yeah.
It is. It paints a very bleak picture.
It does.
But despite the kind of disturbing nature of these accounts,
Yeah.
the document does offer a glimmer of hope, I would say.
Okay.
It highlights the resilience of those who've left IWoT,
Right.
their courage in speaking out, and the determination to kind of rebuild their lives.
Yeah. It's important to remember that people can and do break free from these situations.
Yeah.
And that there are resources out there to help them heal and reclaim their lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some of the most crucial takeaways for our listener?
Well, I think this whole exploration has highlighted the importance of critical thinking,
Right.
especially when we encounter groups or individuals who claim to have all the answers or demand that absolute obedience.
Yeah. It's a reminder that abuse and exploitation can happen anywhere,
Anywhere.
even in organizations that present themselves as spiritual or benevolent.
Right. And if someone starts exhibiting some of these behaviors that we've been talking about,
Yeah.
approach the situation with empathy and concern.
Right.
Try to understand what's drawing them to this group.
Yeah.
And remember that there are resources available
Right.
to help.
This deep dive has been it's been a sobering
It has been.
but necessary look into this kind of dark side of spiritual seeking.
Right. You know, it's important to remember that true spirituality should empower you.
Right?
It shouldn't control you.
That's a good reminder. So keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Stay informed. Trust your instincts.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.